I didn't lose my job in a dramatic meeting. There was no shouting, no warning, no second chance. It happened in silence. One permissions update, one internal report, one meeting I wasn't invited to. On Monday morning, I logged into our system like I had every day for 3 years, except this time half my access was gone. Repositories I had built from scratch were suddenly restricted. Dashboards I maintained showed no activity under my name. By lunch, my manager Wick was presenting my work in a leadership call I wasn't even aware of, screen sharing code I recognized line by line, while my name never came up once. By Friday, HR called me in. They showed me charts, logs, performance summaries. According to the data, I hadn't contributed meaningfully in months. According to the data, Wick had carried the entire project on his back. According to the data, I was replaceable. I tried to explain, but explanations don't matter when paperwork already tells a better story. What Wick didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a habit I picked up early in my career. I tracked everything. Not out of paranoia, out of survival, access changes, commit histories, time-stamped backups, metadata most people never bother to look at. At the time, I didn't think of it as evidence, just insurance. As I walked out of that office with my reputation quietly shredded, I still believed this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, something that could be fixed if I just worked harder, stayed calmer, trusted the system. I was wrong about all of that, because Wick hadn't just taken credit for my work. He had built my downfall into the system itself, and he had no idea I was already tracing every step he took. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, technical, easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. I logged in that morning like I always did, coffee in my left hand, laptop booting with the familiar hum. Overnight deployments were my responsibility, so the first thing I checked was the main repository. Or at least I tried to. Access denied. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. Tech companies love to pretend their systems are flawless, but permissions break all the time. I refreshed, logged out, logged back in. Same result. Half my repositories were gone. Not deleted, restricted. I opened Slack to message Wick. Hey, looks like my access to the Phoenix repo changed overnight. Any idea why? The message showed seen almost immediately. No reply. I moved on to the dashboards. The activity logs told a stranger's story. Where my name used to appear daily, commits, merges, performance optimizations, there was suddenly nothing. Weeks of apparent inactivity. According to the system, I had barely touched the project I'd helped design. But Wick had. His name was everywhere. Commits I recognized instantly. Variable names I had a habit of using. A function I'd written at 2 in the morning after weeks of debugging, now attributed to his credentials. That was when the unease started to crawl up my spine. At 11 a.m., I phoned out why Wick hadn't replied. I wasn't invited to the leadership sync. A colleague texted me halfway through the meeting, "Dude, Wick is presenting Phoenix. He's killing it. Killing it." I pulled up the call recording later. Wick stood confidently in front of the screen, walking executives through his solution. He spoke smoothly, like this was always his vision. When someone asked who built the core architecture, Wick smiled and said, "I led the development personally." No mention of me, not even once. By the end of the day, an internal announcement went out praising Wick for exceptional individual contribution under pressure. My name wasn't on it. The next morning, HR emailed me asking for a quick performance discussion. That's when I understood this wasn't a mistake. Wick hadn't just taken credit for my work. He had rewritten the record, quietly rerouting access, submitting my code under his credentials, and letting the system do what it does best, tell a convincing lie. And the worst part? Everyone believed it. Everyone except me. I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at my laptop like it owed me answers. The blue glow of the screen reflected off my coffee mug, long empty, as I replayed the meeting in my head. Wick's smug smile. The way he'd nodded as executives congratulated him. The way my name had never once passed his lips. It was hard not to feel betrayed. Harder still to admit how blindsided I was. Because Wick and I hadn't always been enemies. When I first joined Nexorium Tech, Wick had been the one who vouched for me. He had introduced me to the team, guided me through our messy onboarding process, and even stayed late multiple nights helping me debug my first big deployment. At the time, I had trusted him almost like a mentor, or maybe even a friend. Someone you could lean on in a company where politics often mattered more than skill. I remembered our first project together 2 years ago, before I ever became the guy who gets things done quietly. Wick had made a joke about how I probably over-documented everything and would make him look like a rookie. I'd laughed. It had felt natural, safe. That trust had been the foundation of everything I'd built here. But trust, I learned that week, was fragile. And it wasn't just Wick. The company itself had its own pressures, the kind that made betrayal almost invisible. Performance metrics were skewed, management rewarded appearances over results, and HR's main priority was avoiding lawsuits, not protecting hardworking engineers. That's why no one questioned Wick's sudden rise. No one noticed that entire projects were now attributed to him instead of the team who had actually built them. Even my closest colleagues were careful. They asked me how I was doing, but no one dared challenge Wick. Not openly. Not yet. It was in that quiet despair that I realized something crucial. I wasn't powerless. I might have been erased from the system for now, but I still had knowledge, experience, and habits Wick could never replicate. I still remembered every commit, every feature, every line of code, every decision he had tried to take credit for. And if I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I would need to understand exactly how Wick had engineered this betrayal. That night, I started tracing back every change, every access log, every subtle reroute in the system. What had seemed like ordinary work suddenly became breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs Wick had left unconsciously while thinking he was clever. I didn't know it yet, but those breadcrumbs were going to be the key to the betrayal was only the beginning. The day HR called me in, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My stomach tightened as I walked into the small, glass-walled office where 2 HR representatives were already waiting, their faces polite but unreadable. Wick wasn't there. He never needed to be. He had already done his work. The system had done the rest. "James," one of them began, sliding a folder across the table. "We've reviewed the Phoenix project metrics. According to our logs, your contribution has been minimal over the last quarter. Can you explain why?" I stared at the graphs, the timelines, the screenshots they handed me. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. I had failed. I had disappeared. I had become replaceable. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain months of effort, nights of debugging, lines of code that no longer bore my name? How could I prove a shadow had rewritten my work as if it belonged to someone else? "Maybe I don't understand," I finally managed, my voice quieter than I expected. "All of this is wrong. I've been working—" "I'm afraid the data doesn't lie," the HR manager interrupted gently. "We need to consider next steps. Leadership is concerned about the pattern." Pattern. My life reduced to a neat little word. By the time I left that office, the sense of disbelief had begun to settle into something heavier, something closer to numbness. I wandered the building, past teams chatting in the break room, past Wick's office with its closed door and smug aura. He walked by me without a glance, and I realized for the first time that he had truly stepped over me, not with confrontation, not with shouting, but with calculation. At my desk, I tried to piece together what had gone wrong. Where did I miss the signs? How could I have been blindsided so completely? Was it a single slip, or had Wick been planning this for months, carefully erasing my presence, rewriting reality so no one, including me, could fight back? The truth was terrifying. I hadn't just lost my credit. I had lost control of everything I had worked for. My projects, my reputation, my career, they were all in Wick's hands now. And the worst part, everyone believed him. That night, sleep refused me. My mind replayed every interaction, every late-night debugging session, every small moment of trust I had given Wick. Each memory now felt like a trap I had walked into blindly, and yet, somewhere deep beneath the shock and disbelief, a quiet ember of determination sparked. I might have been broken now, but the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because even in the deepest darkness you notice the cracks, and cracks are where the truth hides. The next morning, I didn't show up to the office with anger or despair. I showed up with a notebook, a fresh cup of coffee, and a quiet determination that surprised even me. If Wick thought he had erased me, he hadn't counted on one thing. I never worked without leaving a trail. Every line of code, every deployment note, every commit timestamp was mine, and it was all going to tell me the truth. I started small. I traced every access change he had made, every permission reroute, every suspicious override in the system logs. Patterns emerged. Things that had looked like coincidences or glitches now formed a map, a trail pointing to something far bigger than just a stolen project. That's when I found it. A set of encrypted emails buried in an old project archive, ones Wick had assumed I wouldn't see. At first glance, they seemed like routine correspondence with external partners. But as I dug deeper, the names and company domains began to make sense. Wick wasn't just sabotaging me. He was actively collaborating with Vantix Labs, a direct competitor, feeding them insider information and manipulating internal project timelines to weaken Nexorium from the inside. My hands shook as I read the details. He had been redirecting internal resources, delaying critical updates, and even falsifying progress reports, all while making it look like I was slacking. Every mistake I'd been blamed for, every performance warning was part of a plan. This wasn't just office politics. This was corporate sabotage, and Wick had been playing me and everyone else like pieces on a board. I sat back and let it sink in. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had proof. I had leverage. I had the breadcrumbs that led straight to his hidden partnership. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to clarity. The betrayal was bigger than I imagined, but so was the opportunity. Wick had thought he was untouchable, that his manipulation would remain hidden. But he had underestimated one thing. I didn't just know the system, I understood it. And now I understood him. The moment had come to start thinking about defense, about strategy, and about revenge, because this wasn't going to end with Wick getting away, not anymore. By the time Monday rolled around, I had shifted from shock to strategy. I was no longer the confused, blindsided engineer wandering the halls of Nexorium. I was calculating, precise, and patient. Every step Wick had taken against me, every false report, every manipulated metric, I cataloged it. Every shred of evidence became part of a plan. I started quietly securing my position. I documented everything meticulously. Emails, commit logs, access changes, Slack messages, meeting transcripts. I made copies, timestamps, backups, enough to survive any sudden audit or HR interrogation. If Wick thought he could crush me legally or professionally, he was about to find out that I had anticipated him. At the same time, I began observing Wick more closely. He walked around the office with his usual smug confidence, sharing success stories about Phoenix, making small talk with executives, congratulating team members. But I noticed the cracks. He relied too much on appearances, never verifying the actual progress, trusting that his deception would remain invisible. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, just enough to test the waters without revealing my hand. Some were hesitant, afraid of Wick, but a couple quietly confirmed my suspicions. Wick had overstepped in ways even they hadn't noticed. The walls around him were thin, the network he relied on was brittle. I started thinking about revenge, but not emotionally. Not yet. This wasn't about shouting or confrontation. This was about timing, precision, and consequences. Wick had to feel untouchable until the very last moment, because the collapse would hurt the most that way. I mapped out a sequence: collect proof, secure legal footing, and identify external parties who could amplify the fallout. Every move I made was defensive and strategic. I wasn't retaliating yet. I was ensuring that when the time came, he couldn't escape. At home, I paced my apartment late into the night, reviewing the files I had pulled from archived projects and system logs. The more I dug, the more I saw Wick's pattern. He had been playing a long game, but I had discovered the rulebook. And now I was ready. The betrayal had been personal. The upcoming revenge would be professional. Wick wouldn't get away with this, not for a second longer. By the following week, everything was in motion. I no longer waited. Every line of evidence I had painstakingly collected was ready to be deployed, and I knew the exact moment to strike. Wick still strutted through Nexorium like he owned the place, unaware that the web he had spun was about to turn into a trap. I started small, subtly. I flagged inconsistencies in project timelines to internal auditors, sent anonymous tips about irregular resource allocations, and cross-checked his progress reports against system logs. Each discrepancy I uncovered added weight to the growing mound of proof that Wick had been manipulating everything behind the scenes. And then came the bombshell, the legal complaint. One afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from HR marked urgent. Wick had filed a formal accusation against me, claiming I had violated internal data security protocols. The complaint was detailed, maliciously worded, and designed to put me in legal jeopardy, effectively blacklisting me from the tech industry before I could even defend myself. I stared at the email, heart pounding, but not with fear, with clarity. This was, and it confirmed one thing. Wick would do anything to survive, even throw me under the bus completely. He hadn't just betrayed me professionally. He was willing to weaponize the system itself to bury me. I smiled, because now there was no longer any doubt. My revenge couldn't just be strategic. It had to be total. It had to be undeniable. And it had to hit Wick in every way possible, professionally, financially, emotionally. I activated the final phase. I submitted my evidence through the whistleblower channels I had researched, connecting Wick's actions directly to fraud, misappropriation, and insider collaboration with Vantix Labs. Every manipulated report, every rerouted access, every falsified metric, all of it was now in the hands of compliance authorities and federal oversight. Wick's complaint against me, meant to destroy me, would now backfire spectacularly. By the time the investigation concluded, Wick wouldn't just lose his stolen accolades. He would lose the company's trust, his secret partners, and the future he had carefully constructed. As I leaned back in my chair, the enormity of it hit me. The betrayal had been devastating. The plan had been cunning. But now the scales were tipping. Revenge had begun, and Wick had no idea it was already too late. The first sign that Wick's world was cracking came quietly. Meetings were rescheduled, calendars cleared. Executives stopped replying to him in real time. By the end of the week, it was no longer subtle. Compliance teams arrived without announcement, not consultants, investigators. They didn't smile. They didn't explain. They asked for access, full access. And for the first time since I'd known him, Wick looked unsure of himself. I watched from my desk as his confidence drained away piece by piece. The leadership review that Wick had been bragging about for months turned into something else entirely. Doors closed, voices lowered, hours passed. When Wick finally emerged, his face was pale, his hands shaking as he checked his phone again and again. That was when the second betrayal hit him. Vantix Labs cut him off. His secret partner, so eager when the money was flowing, disappeared the moment investigators got involved. Emails went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. The same man Wick had sabotaged Nexorium for now treated him like a liability. By Friday, the legal tables had fully turned. The false data security complaint Wick filed against me collapsed under forensic review. Metadata didn't lie. Access reroutes were traced back to his account. My name was cleared in writing, quietly, officially, permanently. Wick, meanwhile, was called into a final meeting. He didn't come back. An internal announcement went out within the hour. Wick was terminated for gross misconduct and fraud. His projects were reassigned, his achievements scrubbed, his name removed from internal systems as if he'd never existed. I heard later that he begged leadership to reconsider, begged compliance to give him time, begged former allies for help, only to realize he had none. The company distanced itself instantly. His professional network went silent overnight. Meanwhile, I received a different email. Compliance thanked me for my cooperation. Legal confirmed whistleblower protections. Finance confirmed compensation. My record was not just restored, it was validated. Wick lost everything he stole, and I gained back everything he tried to erase. For the first time in months, I slept without replaying the past. The war was over, and I had won. Months passed, and with them came a quiet, steady rebuilding. Nexorium Tech was no longer a battlefield for me. It was a place I had survived and outsmarted. The whispers of Wick's downfall lingered in the corridors, but they no longer mattered. I was free, not just from him, but from the fear, the stress, the uncertainty that had haunted me for years. With the whistleblower settlement, I finally had the freedom to pursue the projects I had always dreamed about. I started my own tech initiative, small at first, but with vision and meticulous planning. Unlike before, no one could sabotage me. Every line of code, every strategic move, every hire I made was protected by the lessons Wick had forced me to learn the hard way. I rebuilt relationships, too. Colleagues who had quietly supported me became collaborators in my new venture. Friends I had lost touch with came back into my life. Even a few connections I had underestimated, including the sister of a former friend of Wick's, became mentors, advisors, and, eventually, a trusted confidant who reminded me there was still humanity in the industry. Years later, the company was thriving, reputation solid, and revenue growing steadily. I wasn't just restored, I was better. Every setback Wick had orchestrated had been transformed into knowledge, strategy, and resilience. Every loss had been a stepping stone. And the best part? I never had to look over my shoulder again. The man who tried to erase me had vanished from my world, a cautionary tale whispered among new hires. No one could touch what I had built. Every code base, every project, every contract was mine, and I managed them with the wisdom Wick had forced me to gain. In the end, revenge was only the beginning. The real victory was building something enduring, something stronger, something mine. And as I leaned back in my office, watching the sunset reflect off the city skyline, I realized something important. Losing everything had led me to exactly what I was meant to find: freedom, respect, and a future I controlled completely. James had not only survived Wick's betrayal, he had thrived beyond it.